Hi guys, my name is Alex, and today we'll delve into the case of a young girl who went to the street to meet her father and disappeared without a trace. Her parents called the police, and detectives started to unfold one shocking clue after another. The investigation became so perplexed that it began to resemble a detective TV show with mind-blowing evidence and impressive police work. Eventually, they were able to unravel the truth, and it shocked everyone. Jessica Knott was born on June 22, 1986, in the city of Allamont Springs, Florida. She had an older brother, a younger sister, and loving parents. Her father worked as a construction worker, often traveling to other states for several days, leaving the kids alone with their mother. Jessica was a cheerful and lovely child. She liked to spend a lot of time outdoors with friends, play with her siblings, and she also had a deep love for animals. On April 5, 1996, when she was 9, Jessica's family decided to visit her grandparents for Easter. On that day, her dad went to the store to buy some stuff for the holiday, while her mom stayed in their apartment, packing for the upcoming trip. Jessica returned from school with other kids and asked her mom if she could go to the yard. She wanted to wait for her dad, who was supposed to be back from the store soon. Her mom agreed and told her daughter not to go anywhere else. Their apartment complex was situated away from the main road, surrounded by trees. The mother felt relatively secure about Jessica's safety. All the neighborhood kids, including Jessica, always played there without constant adult supervision, and everything was fine. A few hours later, around 6 p.m., her father returned home and asked his wife where Jessica is. She was surprised, as her daughter was supposed to be in the yard, waiting for her father, but he claimed she wasn't there. The parents went outside and searched the entire yard, but they couldn't find Jessica. Frustrated, they decided to check with neighbors, hoping someone had seen their daughter. One neighbor mentioned seeing Jessica in the yard earlier. She was sitting on a bench and reading a book, but that didn't help the worried parents find her. As darkness fell and their daughter remained missing, they decided to call the police. Officers arrived in a few minutes, initiated a search, and started interviewing neighbors. Despite their efforts, they couldn't find Jessica, so the police expanded the search area to nearby streets. A few hours later, an unexpected call came into the police station. The caller's voice was muffled by strong background noise, but the operator heard that they would find the missing girl near a water pumping station a few miles from her home. Police rushed to the location, where they were faced with a heartbreaking scene. Jessica's lifeless body was lying near the station, concealed in a black trash bag. It was only a few yards from the road, but the pumping station was situated beneath a bridge, so it was impossible to notice Jessica from the road. Beside the body were some magazines and a child's mirror. Police quickly identified the victim as Jessica Knott and handed her body over to medical examiners. Meanwhile, the investigators focused on tracing the 911 call. It was pretty evident the call came from the murderer, and police hoped it could help to identify them. But there was a challenge. The call was made from a payphone at a gas station less than a mile from the crime scene. And of course, by the time the officers arrived, the perpetrator had already vanished. Detectives tried to find fingerprints on the phone, but it was quite a challenge. It was a public payphone, so there might be multiple prints. Moreover, investigators realized that the criminal had likely wiped the phone after the call, or used gloves. Experts concluded that the girl was killed elsewhere, and her body was transported to the water pumping station. Traces on the ground in front of the facility indicated that the killer likely pulled the body from a vehicle in a trash bag and dragged it across the ground. Jessica's clothing was intact, except for one shoe. Police couldn't find it in the bag or in the surrounding area. The only lead found at the crime scene was the tire track on the ground. Police couldn't be certain it belonged to the killer's vehicle, but they photographed it and made a cast. Medical experts examined the body and determined that the victim died from strangulation. Based on marks on her face and neck, it seemed the killer did it with their bare hands. There was also a hamburger found in her stomach, consumed less than an hour before her death. Her mother stated she hadn't given Jessica anything like that on that day, leading police to believe that the food was provided by the killer. Experts also found no signs of sexual assault, leaving the motive of the perpetrator entirely unclear. At first, the police started to consider Jessica's parents as suspects. Neither of them had a solid alibi at the time of her disappearance. The mother claimed she was in the apartment packing, and the father was shopping. But in theory, they both had the opportunity to commit the crime. Police tried to understand how the killer managed to take Jessica from her complex's yard without anyone noticing or the girl screaming. It led them to believe that the perpetrator likely knew the victim well, and she left with him willingly. Another supporting factor was the tone of the killer's voice during the 911 call. Despite the experts' efforts to clean up the recording, they noticed sorrow and regret in the killer's voice, as if they genuinely regretted committing the murder. The fact that the killer took the risk of calling 911 spoke volumes. The perpetrator could have done it either for the thrill of playing with the police and manipulating the investigation, or they genuinely regretted their actions and wanted to somehow alleviate that feeling. Considering the caller's evident sadness, investigators leaned towards the second option. Police inspected Jessica's father's car, finding something intriguing in the trunk. There was a roll of black trash bags similar to the one containing the victim's body. However, an expert examining the bag from the crime scene quickly determined it differed from those found in the father's car, clearly belonging to a different roll. So the man was temporarily ruled out as a suspect, and investigators shifted their focus to others. Forensic experts examined the victim's clothing and body for possible clues, and they uncovered a few leads. There was a substantial amount of dog hair. Considering Jessica's family didn't own a dog, the animal most likely belonged to the killer. They also found human hair on her body, belonging to an unknown white male. However, experts needed a few days to extract the DNA profile. 2 types of foreign fibers were also discovered on the girl's clothes. Analyzing their structure, experts concluded that one likely came from a car seat cover and the other from a carpet. This further supported the theory that the victim was killed elsewhere and transported to the water pumping station by car. Regarding the dog hair from Jessica's clothing, experts attempted to determine the breed using the FBI's database, which contained microscopic photos of hair from various dog breeds. This database has proven helpful in criminal cases where dog hair could be a key piece of evidence. Experts compared the hair with samples from the database, eliminating one breed after another. In the end, they concluded that the hair on the victim's clothes belonged to a Shar-Pei. Apparently, the killer owned such a dog, and the hair ended up on Jessica's clothes, either in the perpetrator's car or at their house. According to the preliminary theory of investigators, the killer somehow might have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to McDonald's for a hamburger, and then brought her to his home and murdered her. Meanwhile, the experts attempted to enhance the phone call recording, but it proved to be a challenging task. They decided to try a different approach. Detectives sought assistance from NASA and sent them the audio file. NASA had advanced tools for clearing audio recordings, originally designed to enhance recordings from space. They agreed to help and provided the police with a higher quality audio track. However, the experts still needed a voice sample from the suspect to compare it with the call recording and establish a match. Based on the detectives' assumption that the killer might have known Jessica, they decided to play the call recording for her mother, hoping she could recognize it. She listened to it for the first time and said that the voice sounded familiar, but the mother couldn't remember whose voice it is. However, during a second attempt, it clicked. She recognized the voice as their neighbor who lived in the same complex. Although she couldn't remember his name, she told their detectives that the man often walked his Shar-Pei in the yard. Police swiftly identified the man as 35-year-old James Crow. During the initial hours of Jessica's disappearance, investigators already questioned him, along with other neighbors. He mentioned that he saw her in the yard while walking his dog. They spoke briefly, and he left. Detectives dug into his background and found that Crow had no criminal history. He lived with his wife, who was a nurse. The man was a former truck driver, currently unemployed. He spent most of his time strolling the streets with his Shar-Pei, named Pumpkin. The detectives realized that merely the similarity in voice and owning a dog of a specific breed wasn't enough for an arrest, so they obtained a search warrant for his car. There, they discovered two disturbing clues. Under the front passenger seat, there was an empty Happy Meal bag. Considering Jessica had a McDonald's hamburger in her stomach and James didn't have children, this seemed highly suspicious. Experts also noticed that the car had brand new tires, as if they had barely been used. Police found out that Crow replaced them on the day of Jessica's murder, even though his previous tires were not particularly old and could have lasted for several more years. Crow claimed to have left the old tires at a car service, which was quite unusual considering they were not old at all, so the police headed to this service building. By the time they arrived, there was only one tire from James's car left. They compared its tread pattern from what was found near the body, but detectives faced an unexpected twist. They didn't match. However, they initially weren't 100% sure that the tire mark on the ground was left by the killer's car and not some other vehicle. For example, maintenance staff regularly visited the building, and this tire mark could have belonged to their vehicle. The police also searched James's apartment, where they found a new lead. There was a box containing several rolls of trash bags matching the size and color of the one found on the victim's body. Obviously, this couldn't be considered strong evidence, so detectives had to figure out if there was a way to establish that the bags had come from the same roll. At first glance, this task seemed impossible. The bags themselves had no markings or distinctive features, and there were hundreds of manufacturers of such products. But even the detectives were soon surprised by the creativity they could display in such a complex challenge. They contacted Noel Roberts, the man responsible for quality control at the company that produced the bags found in the suspect's apartment. At first, he identified the specific factory where the bags were produced. There was a special code on the cardboard box containing the rolls, indicating that the product was made at a facility in Virginia. The expert then explained that a tiny amount of iron or titanium is included in the composition of the bags, depending on their color. Considering that the factory produces bags of various colors, the materials in the production are constantly changing. The ratio of plastic to iron or titanium literally changes daily, since such tiny amounts cannot be measured with 100% accuracy, and there's no need to do that. In other words, experts could take bags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene, measure the presence of the elements in the plastic using high-intensity X-rays, and get a very precise ratio. Through this analysis, they found that the ratio of iron and titanium to plastic in both bags was absolutely identical, indicating that they were manufactured on the same day and should belong to the same batch. But that's not all. During the production of trash bags, a small amount of microscopic debris ends up on the machines, which is acceptable within production standards. However, this results in small streaks visible to the naked eye when the plastic sheets, later cut into bags, are rolled out. These streaks are present on every bag in large amounts, forming a unique pattern for each roll of fabric. The debris particles on the conveyor belt are constantly moving, falling off, and being replaced by new ones, so the pattern of similar streaks is preserved for a maximum of a few hundred feet of fabric. This means that it can be understood from this pattern that two different bags were not just made within the same batch, but within a few hours of each other. Experts compared the bags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene, and the lines on them matched with astonishing precision. But that's not all. The experts also explained that after the bags are manufactured, they are rolled into a bundle using a machine, which often does this somewhat unevenly. But if you don't look closely, these deviations are almost imperceivable, and the rolls appear smooth. However, Examining the edges of the bags reveals tiny folds and creases, forming a similarly unique pattern as with the streaks. In the end, the experts compared the bags again and found that the pattern on the bags from James's apartment matched the one from the crime scene. Considering all of this, they concluded that the bag used by the killer was not just produced by the same company, but was manufactured within a range of almost 17 boxes apart. This meant that with a high degree of probability, the perpetrator took the bag from one of the rolls in James's apartment. Forensic analysts also compared the two types of fibers found on Jessica's clothing with the carpet in the suspect's apartment and the covers of his car seats. Both samples matched. Finally, a sound expert compared the 911 call recording with a voice sample from James and concluded that the voice belonged to the same person. Despite the incredible work done by the experts, detectives faced one major problem. All this fell into the realm of circumstantial evidence, but they were confident in James's involvement and decided to arrest him. The man was taken into custody, and the prosecution announced its intent to seek the death penalty. Considering that Crowe continued to deny his guilt, the case proceeded to trial. The prosecution presented their version of how this crime happened. James spent a lot of time outside with his dog, and all the local kids knew him well, since they never missed a chance to play with Pumpkin. As a result, they trusted him, and Jessica was no exception. According to the police version, on that day, James noticed her alone on a bench while walking his dog and started a conversation. He offered to take her to McDonald's, promising to buy her a hamburger, and Jessica agreed because she knew him well. After the restaurant, he presumably took her back to the apartment complex and invited her to his place. Perhaps he offered her to play with Pumpkin. His wife was at work, and the presence of carpet fibers from his living room on Jessica's clothes indicated that she was there on the day of her death. According to investigators, James might have attempted to assault the girl, but something went wrong. Based on the forensic report, the perpetrator not only strangled the victim with his bare hands, but also pressed his palm against her face. Perhaps Jessica tried to scream, so he panicked and attacked her. After the girl passed away, he placed her in a garbage bag to transport the body to his car without arousing suspicion from the neighbors. He drove a few miles and left the body near a water station, made the 911 call from a nearby gas station, and returned home. During preliminary hearings, James's lawyers attempted to challenge all available evidence, arguing that there were no solid proof of their client's guilt. Despite the fact that the judge accepted it, the defense was right. In cases involving the death penalty, the standards for evidence are much higher, and in James's case, there was a significant chance of avoiding this sentence. In light of these circumstances, a plea deal was proposed to the suspect. Under the terms of the deal, he would admit guilt to second-degree murder and receive a 40 prison year sentence without parole, thus avoiding the death penalty. In the summer of '98, 2 years after the murder, James agreed to the deal. He wasn't required to disclose any details of the crime by its terms. However, he mentioned that part of his decision was to spare Jessica's family and save them from going through the trial. The prosecution believed the perpetrator genuinely showed remorse, citing his 911 call, the purpose of which remained unclear. The only logical explanation in this context was that James sincerely wanted to alleviate his guilt for such a heinous crime. Jessica's parents were not pleased with the deal, as they had hoped for the death penalty. They also wanted the killer to confess, but James remained silent. Nevertheless, he didn't live to see the end of his term. James passed away in November 2011 at the age of 49 due to health problems, taking the details of his actions and motives with him to the grave. Jessica's case involved truly unique work by experts and detectives. The amount of information they gathered by examining ordinary garbage bags astonished even the judge, who had never encountered such evidence throughout his career. Alright guys, share your thoughts on this story in the comment section, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching.